Helmut was a lovely guy, and the only way I can describe his character, I think, is to use a very obscure English word, which is droll. It's a kind of extremely dry sense of humour. He was somebody who saw a lot going on around him and had considerable insight, but he didn't shout his response to you. He was a quiet man where the odd word told you that he really understood fully the humour of the situation, or the meaning of what you were trying to do, or the implication of a debate or a conversation. There were wonderful times when he brought Christine Hawley and myself over to the Technical University, and we had these workshops where we brought fantastic enthusiasm. And what was interesting was that later, when one came to be an examiner for all the Viennese schools, that it was clear that the track record of Helmut's institute was extraordinarily high. In a quiet way, he has inspired so many people. There's the architecture itself, and there was one thing that I always enjoyed almost sending him up over, which was the idea of the Richter relaxed detail, the notion of not necessarily going to a great deal of bother and expense of connecting pieces of building together if they didn't really need to be connected. And I think that the housing in the south of Vienna is a marvellous example of the Richter relaxed detail. When I was last in Vienna, I looked for the Chinese restaurant in the centre of town, which is obviously gone. But again, it was a marvellous example of the Richter relaxed detail. And I think if we look at his early work done after coming back from UCLA, it was very detailed design, but extremely evocative. There was a wonderful house done for the doctor somewhere in the Alps, which was a great inspiration to me, and particularly to Yael, my wife, who was a student way out in Tel Aviv, was suddenly seeing this extraordinary piece of architecture, the metal drifting. But all this is about him as a creative artist. I think the guy himself, with this special droll humour and acute sense, was probably a much more enjoyable companion than a lot of people who do a lot of chit-chat and sort of jolly and make smart remarks. And I was delighted when he and Celia got the new office together. Although I have fond memories of the old office, this extraordinary place where I remember taking 60 students from both London and Frankfurt all together in a giant group, and we just couldn't get into the office. I think the office could only get about 18 people in if you squeezed them, and everybody was drifting down the staircases, and people coming up, and they said, "What's up there?" And they said, "Oh, there's all this amazing stuff lying around, like a kind of brilliant junk shop. Somebody should recreate that room as a museum piece." I know sometimes museum pieces like that are creepy, but I think the recreation of the old Richter office would be a fantastic thing. I think the last time I saw him was when one was not quite sure. He was in the wheelchair. Well, one wasn't quite sure whether he could understand what he was saying. Occasionally he made a kind of eye movement that implied that he possibly could. And he will be one of the people, I'm sure, to be reinvestigated. I hope not by some incredibly boring PhD student, but probably will be. But he will be reinvestigated by the next generation, looking at what made the Austrian contribution to late 20th century architecture so special. What a lovely guy.